The ad had appeared late at night, glowing faintly on Evelyn's cracked laptop screen as the rain whispered against her window. Assistant needed. Discretion required. Immediate start. High pay. No name. No company. No address. Just a number and a promise that sounded too good to be real. She should have ignored it. But when your brother is lying in a hospital bed waiting for a surgery you can't afford, too good to be real becomes too desperate to question. So she sent her resume, a brief note, and waited. The reply came within minutes. A single line. Be at Thorne Estate tomorrow at 9 a.m. By dawn, she was on a bus heading toward the cliffs that marked the city's edge. The world outside grew wilder as she traveled, concrete giving way to mist, skyscrapers fading into jagged rocks and waves that crashed below like something ancient and alive. When she saw it, she almost stopped breathing. Thorne Estate rose from the cliffs like a sleeping beast made of glass and stone. The walls gleamed in the gray morning light, tall windows reflecting the sea's fury below. Iron gates stood ahead, intricate and cold, with the letter T etched into their center. A voice startled her. "Miss Hart?" A man in a dark suit stood by the gate. His expression was polite, but unreadable. "Mr. Thorne is expecting you." The gates opened without a sound. Evelyn followed the winding path through manicured gardens that looked as if no one had walked them in years. Silence hung heavy. Not peaceful, but lonely. The kind of silence that made you whisper without meaning to. Inside, the mansion was vast, full of sharp lines and cold elegance. The air smelled faintly of cedar and distance. Her footsteps echoed on marble floors until she reached the study, a room lined with bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling, their spines untouched by dust. Then she heard it. A voice. Deep. Controlled. Commanding. "Come in." Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed the door open. He sat behind a sleek mahogany desk, the morning light outlining the sharp planes of his face. Damian Thorne. Even seated, he radiated power, the kind that doesn't need movement to dominate a room. His dark hair was perfectly in place, his shirt crisp, his expression carved from stone. Only his eyes moved, cold gray, watching her like a predator, deciding if she was prey or problem. "You're late," he said. His tone was calm, but it cut like glass. The taxi. I don't need excuses. I need competence." She swallowed. "Yes, sir." He studied her in silence for a long moment. The hum of the sea outside filled the gap between them. Finally, he leaned back slightly. "Do you know who I am, Miss Hart?" "Damian Thorne," she answered softly. "CEO of Thorne Industries." "Good. Then you know why I don't have time for weakness." His hand, resting on the arm of his chair, tensed slightly. The chair itself was sleek, motorized. But it wasn't just furniture, it was a statement, a limitation he refused to name. Her eyes flicked toward it for half a second, and that was all it took. "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't look at me like that." She froze. "Like what?" "Like you're sorry for me." His voice lowered, rough, dangerous. "I don't need pity. I need precision." "I wasn't." He cut her off again. "You want this job? Then remember one thing." His gaze locked on hers, steel gray and unflinching. "You don't look at me with pity. Ever." Evelyn nodded, though her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. There was something behind his fury, something raw, almost wounded. But she understood. Whatever had broken him, he refused to let it show. He gestured toward a stack of papers on his desk. "You'll handle correspondence, scheduling, and confidentiality agreements. You'll live on site. You'll follow instructions exactly as given. Any questions?" She hesitated. "Just one. Why did your last assistant leave?" His lips curved, not into a smile, but something colder. She forgot the rule. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She nodded again, signing the contract he pushed toward her. "Welcome to Thorne Estate," Damian said quietly. "Let's see how long you last." As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of a shattered photo frame tucked into the corner of his desk. A woman's blurred face, glass cracked across it like a scar. Outside, the sea roared beneath the cliffs, as if warning her. But Evelyn didn't turn back. Something about the man in that chair, that voice, that rage, that loneliness, pulled her closer. And as the heavy doors closed behind her, she couldn't help but wonder what had driven Damian Thorne to build a fortress so beautiful and live inside it, utterly alone. Rain fell that night in thin silver lines against the tall windows of Thorne Estate, and the ocean below crashed like a beast too wild to rest. Evelyn stood in the hallway holding the folder Damian had given her earlier that day, her hands still trembling slightly from the weight of the encounter. Every word he had spoken had stayed with her, his command, his anger, his warning not to look at him with pity. She repeated them in her mind over and over as if trying to protect herself from breaking that single unspoken law. She had been shown to her room by a silent housekeeper, a woman who moved like a shadow through the endless corridors. The room was large, far larger than anything Evelyn had ever lived in before, with a view that looked out over the dark, restless sea. Yet even in its beauty there was something cold about it. The air carried the faint scent of metal and ocean, as if the entire house was built to keep people away. She changed into her plain pajamas and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the folder. The papers inside were filled with contracts, sked, ULIs and non-disclosure clauses, all signed with Damian Thorne's precise black signature. But there was one paper that wasn't part of the contract, a handwritten note in the same neat script. It said, "Only answer when spoken to and never enter the West Wing without permission." She frowned, reading it again. The West Wing. The warning was simple but heavy, like a lock placed over a secret. Evelyn felt curiosity rise despite herself. Maybe it was where he kept old memories, or maybe it was where the part of his life he wanted to forget still breathed. The hours slipped by. The rain softened into mist, and the silence of the house deepened. Somewhere far below, a grandfather clock ticked in slow rhythm. She was about to lie down when she heard a faint sound, a low mechanical hum followed by the soft thud of wheels on marble. Her heart skipped. She stood and moved to the door, pressing her ear against it. The sound came closer, steady, controlled, and then stopped right outside her room. The doorknob didn't move, but she felt the presence on the other side. The air shifted like someone was there listening. Evelyn waited, breath held, then came the voice, deep and quiet through the door. "Are you awake?" It was him. "Yes," she whispered. "Good." His tone held no warmth. "You start early. There will be coffee and instructions in the study at 6 sharp. Do not be late." She wanted to say something more, but the sound of the wheels started again, moving away, fading into the long hallway. Sleep didn't come easily after that. When morning light finally touched the room, she dressed quickly and went downstairs. The house was still silent except for the sea's distant roar. The study door was open. Damian was already there in his wheelchair behind the same desk, his eyes on a file. He looked composed, powerful, untouched by the sleepless night that had kept her mind spinning. "You are punctual," he said without looking up. "I try to be, sir." He finally lifted his gaze and it caught her like a hook. "Sit down, Miss Hart." She obeyed. He closed the file and leaned forward. The movement was smooth, controlled, but she noticed how his hands gripped. The armrests, hard for balance. "You will manage my correspondence, handle my calls, prepare reports. You will not interfere with personal matters. You will not speak of my condition. You will not ask about it, and you will not look at me the way others do." Evelyn met his eyes steady, despite the tremor in her chest. "I won't." For the first time, his mouth curved a fraction into something that might have been a smile or a test. "We will see." He rolled away from the desk and stopped beside the window, where the ocean stretched endless and gray. "Do you know why people fail here, Miss Hart? Because they break the rule." He turned his head slightly. "Correct. They think they can save me, but this house does not need saving, neither do I. She wanted to ask, then why he lived alone surrounded by walls that echoed with emptiness, but she stayed silent. He looked back at her, his gaze unreadable. Good. You learn fast. Keep learning, or you will end up like the others. The others. The question burned in her throat, but she didn't dare ask it, not yet. Later, when she left the study, she passed a closed door at the end of the west corridor. A faint light glowed beneath it, and for just a second she thought she heard something behind it. Not movement exactly, but a sound like a sigh carried through time. She stood there, frozen, torn between fear and curiosity. Then she turned away, telling herself the same thing she had told herself since she arrived. She was here for the job, nothing else. But deep down, she already knew the truth. There was something inside that house waiting to be uncovered, and whatever it was, Damian Thorne was guarding it with his silence, his anger, and his pain. Morning arrived with a sky of steel and mist. The sound of the ocean below the cliffs was louder that day, as if the waves themselves were restless. Evelyn stood in the kitchen waiting for the coffee to finish brewing. The mansion felt both alive and dead at once, alive with secrets, dead with silence. Every step she took echoed through the marble halls, like footsteps inside a tomb. When she carried the tray to the study, Damian was already there, his posture straight, his face expressionless as he stared at a screen filled with numbers and charts. He didn't look at her when she entered. He never did, not immediately, at least. She placed the coffee on the edge of his desk, careful not to make noise. He finally spoke. "You memorized the schedule for today?" "Yes, sir." 3 meetings, a conference call, and a dinner at the estate with investors. He nodded, barely acknowledging her. Then he turned his head slowly, his eyes sharp like silver blades. "And you will attend the dinner?" Her heart skipped. "I will. Yes, I need someone who knows how to listen without speaking and observe without being noticed. That seems to be your strength." She didn't know if that was a compliment or an insult, but she nodded anyway. "You may go," he said, but as she turned to leave, he added, "Miss Hart, do not touch the West Wing door again." Evelyn froze. Her fingers tightened around the tray. How did he know? He didn't look away from the screen. "I see everything in this house. Remember that." Her breath caught for a moment. She wanted to explain she had only passed by, but something in his voice told her it would be useless. So she left, silently, heart pounding. She couldn't shake the thought that he had cameras watching her every move. The day passed in a blur of tasks, files, and unanswered questions. She discovered that behind Damian's control there was exhaustion. The way his hand sometimes trembled before gripping the wheels of his chair tighter. The way his gaze drifted to the window and stayed there as if chasing something far beyond the sea. When night fell, the mansion changed. The lights dimmed and the wind outside howled across the glass walls. Evelyn walked through the corridor, as with a folder in her hands when she heard voices coming from the study. The tone was sharp and angry. "You can't hide forever," Damian said. Another man's voice replied, "The board is losing patience. They want results. Tell them I deliver results, not excuses," Damian snapped. The other man laughed bitterly. "You've turned this place into a prison for yourself. You refuse every treatment, every visitor, every light of hope. What are you even protecting?" There was a pause, then Damian's voice low and cold. "You wouldn't understand, Adrian. Some wounds don't heal." Adrian. She thought the name familiar from the file. Dr. Adrian Cole, his physician. The door opened suddenly, and the man stepped out tall in a dark coat, eyes narrowing as he saw her eavesdropping. He didn't say anything, just gave her a look, half warning, half pity, before walking away into the night. Inside the study, Damian sat still in his chair, staring at the dying fire. His jaw was tense, his hands gripping the armrests, as if they were the only things keeping him from breaking apart. "You like listening through doors, Miss Hart?" She froze. "I wasn't. He turned the chair to face her, his eyes colder than ever. "Don't lie to me. Everyone lies eventually." Her chest tightened. "I'm not lying." He stared at her for a long moment. Then his voice softened, but only slightly. "Curiosity gets people hurt here. Be careful with it." She wanted to leave, but something in his eyes held her there. She saw something behind the anger, something fragile, like glass, ready to crack. He looked away, first dismissing her with a flick of his hand. Later that night, as she walked back to her room, the words wouldn't leave her mind. "What are you even protecting?" The wind pushed against the windows, and far in the west wing, she saw a light flicker behind the forbidden door. Just once, like a heartbeat in the dark, she stopped, unable to move. The house felt alive, watching her. The silence was too deep, too careful. She knew someone or something was awake beyond that locked corridor, and that it was the reason Damian Thorne never slept without rage in his eyes. The next morning, the sun never fully rose. Thick clouds hung over the sea, turning the mansion into a shadow caught between night and day. Evelyn walked through the corridor carrying the latest reports for Damian, but her mind wasn't on the papers. It was still on the flicker of light she had seen in the west wing the night before. Every step she took past that locked door made her pulse quicken. The silence there was heavier, colder, as if something behind it breathed softly, waiting. When she entered the study, Damian was alone again, dressed in black, his hair slightly undone, as if he hadn't slept. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp, the way glass is sharp, right before it shatters. "You're early," he said, not looking up from the file in his lap. "I couldn't sleep," she answered quietly. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Good, neither could I, perhaps. This house feeds on sleeplessness." She didn't respond. Instead, she placed the documents on his desk. The scent of coffee filled the air for a brief moment before it vanished into the vastness of the room. Damian's voice broke the silence. "Have you ever lost something that you couldn't bury because it never truly died?" She hesitated, unsure how to answer. The question felt like a trap. "I think so," she said softly. "My father." He nodded slowly, closing the file as if the conversation was more important than business. "He died." "Yes, when I was young. Lucky man," Damian said, eyes fixed on the window. "The dead are free from memory. The living are chained to it forever." She wanted to ask what memory chained him, but before she could, he turned his chair abruptly and rolled toward a drawer, pulling out a silver key. He held it up between them. "The West Wing. You want to know what's behind it, don't you?" Her heart stopped. She tried to hide it, but the slight catch in her breath betrayed her. He dyed her face, and then placed the key on the desk between them. "If you open it, you'll see what everyone else ran from." His voice was low, steady, but there was pain beneath. The surface like a quiet thunderstorm. "I've lost 3 assistants in a year. They all thought they could handle what they saw. They couldn't." "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because you're still here. And I can't decide if that makes you brave or foolish." He pushed the key closer to her but didn't force it. She stared at it for a long moment before shaking her head. "I'm not here for your secrets, sir." "No," he said softly. "You're here for money, and yet money never makes people stay as long as you have." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Not warmth exactly, but recognition. The air between them tightened the way air does before lightning strikes. He leaned back, voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you know why I stay in this chair, Miss Hart? It isn't just the accident. It's the punishment for believing someone loved me when all they wanted was what I could give them." She swallowed, her heart aching. He had been betrayed, not just broken, but abandoned in the most human way. "Who was she?" Evelyn asked before she could stop herself. His gaze hardened. "Don't ever ask that again." The moment fractured like glass. The walls seemed to close in. The air was cold and heavy with all the things neither dared to say. That night Evelyn walked the hall again, unable to rest. The silver key glinted in her pocket. She didn't remember taking it, but there it was, cold against her palm. She reached the west wing door and paused. The faint hum of electricity came from behind it, like a machine alive in the dark. She turned the key. The lock clicked softly and the door opened a few inches. The smell of antiseptic and old roses drifted out. Her hand shook as she pushed it open farther. Inside, the light was dim. A large covered object stood in the center of the room like a monument under a white sheet, and in the corner, on a small table, sat a framed photo. The glass was cracked, but the image was clear. Our Damian standing beside a woman in a white dress, smiling in a way Evelyn had never seen before. Her heart pounded. She stepped closer and saw another photo beneath it, the same woman lying in a hospital bed, pale eyes closed, flowers surrounding her. Suddenly the lights flickered and a low mechanical sound echoed behind her. The door slammed shut. She turned, and Damian was there, his face pale, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair hard. "I told you not to open it." His voice broke into a whisper. "You weren't supposed to see her." Evelyn's blood turned to ice. "Who is she?" He looked past her at the covered object, his voice trembling like a confession from a ghost. "The reason I stopped believing in mercy." The storm began before midnight, thick rain slashing against the glass walls of the mansion. The sound filled every corridor like a warning. Evelyn stood near the west wing door, her pulse still unsteady from what she had seen. Damian had locked the room again, and no one spoke of it since. But the image of that covered figure and the photo of the woman in white refused to leave her mind. She could still see the grief in his eyes when he caught her there, the kind that comes from wounds that never close. She tried to sleep, but the wind howled through the cracks like voices whispering her name. At some point she gave up and walked downstairs. The lights were dim, the air cool with the scent of rain. She turned toward the study, drawn by instinct, not reason. Inside, Damian sat near the fireplace, a glass of untouched whiskey beside him. The flames painted gold across his face, revealing how tired he looked. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched, as if even silence was a battle. "Couldn't sleep," he said without turning. "Neither could I," she replied softly. He let out a low sound that might have been a laugh or a sigh. "Come closer, Miss Hart. Sit. I promise not to bite." She sat across from him, the firelight flickering between them. He stared into the flames for a long time before speaking. "I used to think pain was punishment, but it's not. It's reminder. It keeps you alive." She didn't answer, afraid that if she did, he would stop talking, and she wanted to hear everything he'd hidden. "That room you saw," he said finally. "It was hers. Her name was Celeste. My fiancée. We were driving home from an awards ceremony the night of the crash. She was drunk. I tried to take the wheel, but it was too late." Evelyn's chest tightened. "The papers said it was your fault. I told them it was. I wanted her family to remember her kindly, not as the woman who destroyed everything." He looked up, eyes hard as stone. "I paid for silence in blood and bone." The confession hung in the air, heavy as thunder. Evelyn's throat ached with the urge to speak, but no words would come. He turned toward her, a bitter smile tugging at his mouth. "Tell me, Miss Hart, do you pity me now?" "No," she whispered. "I ache for you, but that's not the same." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, something human that burned through the cold. "You're the first to say that." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the sea through the glass. He watched her in that moment, as if seeing her for the first time, not as an employee, but as something dangerously close to hope. "You should leave," he said suddenly. "The board will meet here next week. They want my resignation. They'll look for weakness, and they'll find it in you." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving." He laughed under his breath, a sound that carried both pain and disbelief. "Why do you care?" "Because someone should," she answered quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain softened into steady rhythm, and the fire's warmth seemed to pull them closer. Damian reached for his glass, his fingers brushing hers by accident. The touch froze them both. He didn't pull away. She didn't either. "You make me forget what I am," he whispered. "And what is that?" she asked. "A man who doesn't feel anymore." She looked into his eyes and saw the lie hiding there. He felt too much. That was his curse. Hours later, when she finally left the study, the storm had eased, but the house felt changed alive in a way she couldn't name. She reached her room and sat on the bed, heart still racing. The memory of his voice still echoed through her mind. Downstairs, Damian remained by the fire alone, staring at the flames, as if they could burn away everything he had confessed. He lifted the silver key from his pocket, turning it in his hand. The reflection of the fire danced over it, and his voice broke into a whisper meant for no one. "Do you dare think I can't desire you?" And upstairs in the darkness, Evelyn froze, the same words slipping through her mind, without understanding how she had heard them. The next days moved like a quiet storm brewing beneath calm skies. The board meeting approached, and the mansion turned into a battlefield disguised as elegance. Men in black suits arrived early in the mornings, carrying files and questions they whispered behind closed doors. Evelyn could feel the tension in every hallway. It clung to the air like smoke. Damian changed too. He was sharper, colder, but not toward her. His focus returned with brutal precision. Every decision he made was a strike against the people waiting for his fall. Yet when the meetings ended and the mansion emptied, he grew silent again, staring at the sea from his glass walls as if waiting for it to swallow him whole. Evelyn worked beside him more than ever. She memorized his routine, his tone, his smallest gestures. She learned how to read the silence between his words. She knew when to bring coffee before he asked, and when to disappear before he needed space. But what she didn't expect was how much she began to crave his voice, even when it was cold. She told herself it was respect, but in truth, it was something far more dangerous. One evening after a long meeting, he rolled into the hallway, looking exhausted. Evelyn followed, holding the last F documents. He stopped near the staircase where the light from the chandelier bathed him in soft gold. She could see how pale he was, his hands trembling slightly from the long hours of strain. "You should rest," she said gently. He gave a short laugh. "Rest is for people who have the luxury of peace. I lost that a long time ago." She wanted to argue, but his eyes met hers, and something in them stopped her. It wasn't anger or pride. It was fear, the kind that hides behind strength. He turned his chair toward her, his voice low. "You shouldn't stay this close to me, Miss Hart. I don't want to hurt you. You already did," she whispered, before she could stop herself. "Every time you push me away." His breath caught. He looked at her as if she'd crossed a line, but instead of anger, there was only silence, the kind that hums with emotion, too heavy to name. He rolled closer until she could feel the heat from his body and hear the faint mechanical hum of his chair. His gaze locked on hers. "You think I can't feel that? You think I can't want you?" She froze, her pulse quickening. "I never said that, but you thought it." He leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me, Evelyn, what do you see when you look at me? A man or a ruin?" Her voice shook when she answered. "I see both, and maybe that's why I can't walk away." His hand lifted halfway as if to touch her face, but stopped inches from her skin. His control was visible in every muscle. She could feel the war inside him between desire and restraint. He closed his eyes for a moment, then whispered almost in pain, "Go, before I forget why I shouldn't." She stepped back, but her heart refused to listen. It kept reaching for him, even as her feet moved away. That night's sleep avoided her again. The memory of his voice wrapped around her thoughts, every word echoing. "Do you think I can't want you?" Near midnight, she heard the sound of his chair moving through the corridor. She opened her door quietly and saw him outside, dressed in black, a file in his lap, heading toward the west wing, the forbidden part of the house. Her curiosity burned stronger than fear. She followed silent until he entered the room and closed the door. Through the small gap in the frame, she saw him stop beside the covered figure from before. His hand brushed the white sheet, but he didn't uncover it. He spoke softly to the air. "I still hear you, Celeste. Even in her voice you live. But I can't love a ghost forever." Evelyn's heart broke for him. She stepped back, but the floor creaked. He turned sharply, his eyes meeting hers through the crack. "Come in, Evelyn," he said quietly. "Since you've already followed me this far." She entered slowly, her breath shallow. The room felt colder than before. He turned his chair toward her, the firelight from the hallway reflecting in his eyes like molten silver. "You shouldn't see this part of me," he said. "Then show me all of you," she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment, his walls trembling. Then his voice broke into a whisper filled with anger and desire. "You think I can't want you because of this chair? Do you dare think I can't desire you?" The words hit her like a storm, and before she could speak, he wheeled closer, his hand catching her wrist. His touch was fire, his eyes darker than the sea outside. He didn't kiss her, not yet, but the air between them burned alive. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning split the horizon, illuminating the mansion, as if the heavens themselves were watching. Two souls broken by guilt, now trapped in a moment that neither of them could escape. The storm that had shaken the house that night did not fade with morning. It left the air thick, heavy, and full of something neither of them could name. Evelyn avoided Damian for most of the day, her mind still burning with the memory of his words, his touch, his eyes that had looked at her, not with pity, not with command, but with hunger. She had seen what no one else had ever seen, the fire he kept buried under his silence, but now she feared what it might destroy if it burned. The mansion seemed quieter than usual. Servants spoke in whispers. The sea outside crashed harder against the cliffs, as if echoing the storm inside. The board members had begun to arrive again, and their voices filled the air with tension. Damian faced them all with his usual calm, sharp and unyielding, but Evelyn noticed the small tremors in his hands, the way his jaw tightened each time someone called him broken behind his back. By evening the house was empty again, and he called for her. She entered the study and found him sitting by the window, the sun setting behind him, painting the sea in shades of red. His face was unreadable, but his eyes held shadows that didn't belong to the light. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly. "I thought you wanted distance," she replied carefully. He gave a small, bitter smile. "I never know what I want anymore, Miss Hart. But I know one thing. I can't stand your silence. It's louder than pity." She stepped closer, her pulse racing. "I didn't mean to make things harder for you." "You didn't," he said, his voice low. "You made me feel alive, and that's the problem." The words hung in the air, sharp and trembling. He turned his chair toward her, his gaze burning. "You have to leave after the board meeting tomorrow. It's not safe for you here." "Not safe," she repeated. "What do you mean?" He looked away, as if the truth itself was poison. "You think the people around me care about loyalty. They want the company and they'll destroy anyone close enough to use against me, including you. Then let them try," she said impulsively. "I'm not afraid." He stared at her long enough for her to feel his control slipping like sand through fingers. Then his voice turned raw. "You should be Evelyn, because if they don't hurt you, I will not in the way you think, but because I can't be the man you deserve." Before she could speak, the door burst open. Adrian Cole entered, his expression tense. He glanced at Evelyn, though, and at Damian, his tone sharp. "I warned you this would happen. She's become your weakness." "Get out," Damian snapped. "Not until you listen," the doctor said. "The board knows about her. They're saying you're keeping your assistant for company. They have photographs." "Damian, you're giving them the weapon they needed." Evelyn's stomach dropped. Damian's expression darkened, and for a moment she saw pure fury in his eyes. "Who leaked it?" Adrian hesitated. "I don't know, but they'll use it tomorrow. They'll vote to remove you permanently." "Get out," Damian repeated, his voice low. "Dangerous." Adrian left without another word, and the silence that followed was unbearable. Evelyn took a step forward, but Damian slammed his hand on the desk. "Don't say anything." She flinched but didn't leave. "I won't let them humiliate you." He looked at her, the anger fading into something far worse, despair. "You can't stop them. You think I'm strong, but I'm not. Not anymore. They'll see that in my eyes tomorrow. They'll see you and know I care. That's enough to end everything I've built." Evelyn moved closer, her voice shaking. "Then let it end. Damian, let the lie die with it." His eyes met hers, filled with a storm of conflict. "I told you once not to look at me with pity, and you haven't. But if you stay, if you keep standing there, I'll forget every rule I made to protect you." "Then forget," she whispered. He stared at her like a man standing on the edge of something fatal. Then he reached for her, pulling her closer until she felt the heat of his breath. His voice broke against her skin. "Do you know what it's like to want something so much that it hurts to breathe?" "Yes," she whispered. "I do." The room around them seemed to disappear. The ocean roared below, lightning flashed across the sky, and in that moment he kissed her. It was not gentle, not careful. It was years of loneliness crashing into one reckless instant. She felt the walls she had built crumble, and the ones he had guarded all his life burn to ash.
But before the moment could turn into forever, the study doors flew open again. A tall man in a gray suit stepped in, one of the board members, his expression a mask of triumph. Cameras flashed from behind him, catching the scene in cold white light. "Well," said the man coldly, "now we understand why you refused to step down." Evelyn froze. Damian's hand tightened on her wrist, but his face had gone pale. The sound of the camera shutter echoed through the room, sealing their fate. Outside, the sea crashed harder against the cliffs, as if warning that everything was about to fall. The scandal spread faster than wildfire. By morning, the mansion gates were surrounded by journalists, flashing cameras through the mist. The photo of Damian Thorne, the ruthless billionaire in his wheelchair kissing his young assistant, was everywhere. Evelyn's name was printed in bold letters beside words that burned shame across her chest. "Seductress, manipulator, gold digger." She shut the curtains and sat on the edge of her bed shaking. The house that had once felt cold now felt dangerous. Downstairs she heard shouting, Damian's voice hard and unbroken against the noise of chaos. Get them off my property, he commanded. The sound of slamming doors followed, then silence. When she stepped into the hall, Adrian stood near the staircase, his face grim. You need to leave now, he said quietly. I'm not going, she answered. I won't run away. Adrian sighed. You don't understand, Evelyn, he's protecting you by pushing you out. This isn't just about bad press. The board will use this to destroy him completely, and they don't care what happens to you in the process. Before she could respond, Damian appeared at the end of the corridor, his expression carved from stone. He looked at her but didn't move closer. Leave, Evelyn, now, that's an order. Her heart twisted. Damian, please let me explain. There's nothing to explain, he said, his voice sharp as ice. The board meets tonight. They'll demand my resignation, and if you're here they'll drag you through it too. I won't allow that. You can't decide for me. He rolled forward, eyes blazing. I can and I will. You were never supposed to matter, but you do, and that makes you dangerous. Go before I forget why I'm sending you away. The words hit her like a slap. He didn't wait for her reply. He turned his chair and disappeared into the elevator without another word. The sound of the doors closing echoed like an ending. Evelyn packed her bag with trembling hands. By the time the car came to take her away, the rain had started again, soft, steady, relentless. She looked back once at the mansion standing against the storm, glass walls shining like a cage made of light. She whispered goodbye, but no one heard. That night the city lights blurred through her tears as she sat in a cheap motel room staring at the headlines. Damian Thorne steps down, CEO embroiled in scandal. The photo of his face filled the screen, calm, stoic, unbroken, but she could see what no one else could, the emptiness behind his eyes. She turned off the television and cried into the silence. 3 days later a knock came at her door. She opened it, expecting the hotel manager, but it was Adrian. He looked tired, older somehow. You need to hear this, he said, and handed her a thin folder. Inside were documents, photos, and an accident report. The truth: Damian didn't cause the crash. His fiancée Celeste was behind the wheel. She was the one drinking. He took the blame to protect her family and the company. His silence cost him everything. Evelyn's hands shook as she read each page. Her voice cracked. Why would he hide this? Because he thought guilt would make him forget love. Adrian said softly, but you changed. That he loves you, Evelyn, but he doesn't believe he deserves you. She stood, suddenly the decision already burning inside her. Where is he? Adrian hesitated. He's at the estate, but he isn't the same. He hasn't spoken since the meeting he signed away control of Thorne Industries.
Evelyn didn't wait. She left the room and took the first taxi back to the cliffs. The rain followed her all the way. When the car stopped outside the mansion, the gates were locked, but she pushed through anyway, soaking wet by the time she reached the door. Inside, the halls were dark. Only the faint hum of the storm filled the air. She found him in the study, sitting in the dark, staring at the sea. The fire had gone out. He didn't turn when she entered. You should be gone, he said quietly. You should stop pretending you don't need anyone, she replied, stepping closer. He turned finally, his eyes dull. You saw what I am. Broken, finished. Why are you here, Evelyn? Because I know the truth, she said. You took the blame for her and destroyed yourself for a woman who left you. You think that makes you strong, but it doesn't. It makes you human. He stared at her, his breath uneven. You think knowing that changes anything? Yes, she said, because now you can stop hiding behind the ghost of a lie. For a moment he said nothing. Then the mask cracked and he whispered, I can't let myself want you, not when I can't even stand beside you. Then I'll sit beside you, she said, and dropped to her knees before him, taking his hands in hers. Her voice trembled. I'm not leaving, Damian, not again. Lightning flashed outside, throwing their shadows together across the glass. He looked at her like a man waking from a nightmare. His voice broke. I told you once not to pity me, and I never will, she whispered. He reached out slowly, his fingers tracing her face, as if learning the shape of hope for the first time. The storm outside grew louder, the wind screaming against the windows, but inside the silence was sacred. He leaned forward until their foreheads touched. If you stay, he murmured, the world will tear you apart. Then let it. She whispered back, because I'd rather be torn apart than live pretending this isn't real. For the first time years. Damian Thorne closed his eyes, not from pain, but from surrender. The next morning dawned gray and still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The storm had passed, but the air remained heavy. Evelyn stood on the balcony of the estate, her hair damp from the mist below. The sea roared endlessly, crashing against the cliffs. She had stayed, The choice was no longer uncertain. She would stand beside Damian, no matter what followed. Yet as she watched the restless ocean, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was coming. Inside the mansion, the silence was different now, softer, more human. She found Damian in the music room, a place she had never seen before. Dust floated in the pale light as he sat by an untouched grand piano, his fingers brushing the keys without sound. He looked up when she entered, his face tired but strangely peaceful. "You shouldn't have come back," he said quietly. "I couldn't leave you like that," she answered. "You saved everyone but yourself. It's my turn now." He stared at her for a long time, then looked away, his voice low. "You think love fixes people, Evelyn? It doesn't. It just reminds them of what they've lost." "Then let me remind you until you remember who you were," she whispered. Something flickered in his eyes, but before he could speak, the front door slammed. The echo carried through the mansion, followed by footsteps sharp and confident. Adrian appeared in the doorway, his face pale. "There's something you both need to hear. The board isn't done. They've decided to sell the company piece by piece. They'll strip your name off everything, Damian, and they've already begun freezing accounts, including the estate." Damian's hands tightened on the armrests. "Let them. They can have it all." "No," Adrian said. "They're going after her too." Evelyn frowned. "What do you mean?" "They traced the payment for your brother's surgery. It came from Damian's private fund. They're calling it bribery to keep you silent." Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her. "I didn't even know he paid that bill." Damian's jaw hardened. "He wasn't supposed to. That was my decision. I won't let them touch you." Adrian's voice dropped too late. "They've already filed charges. It's all over the news. The police will come by morning." The air went still. Damian rolled back from the piano, eyes blazing. "Then there's only one thing left to do." He turned toward Evelyn. "You have to disappear tonight. Take my car, go to the mountains. There's a house there under my name. No one will find you." She shook her head. "I won't run again." He looked at her with a kind of desperation she had never seen before. "You don't understand. They will destroy you, to destroy me. Then let them try," she said fiercely. "I won't spend my life hiding from people who feed on lies." For a moment he just stared at her. Then something inside him cracked open. He wheeled closer until she could feel the heat from his skin. He took her hand, his grip trembling. "I can't protect you from this world, but I can promise you one thing. If they come for us, they'll find us together." Her eyes filled with tears. "You mean that?" "Yes," he said, his voice breaking. "You stayed when I told you to leave. That's enough to make me fight again." Before she could speak, a sudden explosion shattered the air. The sound came from outside. Windows trembled, alarms screamed. Adrian rushed to the balcony. "My God, the garage, they blew it up. Someone's trying to break in." Damian's expression turned to steel. "Get her out, Adrian. Now." Evelyn froze. "I'm not leaving you." He raised his voice louder than she'd ever heard it. "Go, Evelyn, please." But the sound of footsteps thundered through the halls before she could move. Men in black suits forced their way inside, shouting orders. They weren't police, they were hired security from the board. Their leader pointed toward Damian, cold and ruthless. "End this tonight." Evelyn ran to Damian's side, blocking his chair. Her voice shook. "Leave him alone. You have no right." The man sneered. "The company dies with him. That was the deal." Damian grabbed her hand and whispered, "Run," but she refused. The man raised his weapon, not a gun but a stun baton charged with electricity. Damian wheeled forward, slamming into him, knocking the weapon aside. He shouted to Adrian, "Take her out the back." Adrian pulled Evelyn's arm, but she struggled. Damian turned one last time, their eyes meeting across the chaos. "You were the only thing that made me feel alive." Then everything happened at once. The men rushed forward. Adrian shouted. Damian's chair collided with the table. Sparks flew and the chandelier above them cracked loose, crashing down with a roar. When the dust settled, the intruders were gone and the lights flickered out. Evelyn crawled through the smoke, calling his name. Her hands shook as she reached his chair, half buried under the fallen glass. He was alive, breathing but bleeding. She cradled his face, tears streaming down her cheeks. He opened his eyes, barely whispering, "I told you not to stay." She held him closer, her voice breaking. "You're not dying. Not after everything we've survived." He smiled faintly, even in pain, his gaze burning through the tears. Then tell me again what you see when you look at me. She kissed his forehead and whispered, I see a man who still has something to live for. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, but all she could hear was his uneven breathing and the sea raging outside as if the world refused to let go of their story. The night the sirens reached the cliffs felt endless. Red and blue lights flashed across the glass walls of the mansion as paramedics rushed inside. Evelyn held Damian's hand, refusing to let go, even when they lifted him onto a stretcher. He was pale, his breath shallow, but his eyes never left hers. The last thing he said before they took him away was softer than a whisper. Don't let them bury what we fought for. 3 days passed in a blur of hospital corridors and sleepless hours. Evelyn never left his side. He had survived the collapse, but the doctors warned the injury had worsened his condition. He might lose all. Movement below the chest, permanently. Yet even as she sat in that white room listening to the machines beep, she knew this wasn't the end. Damian Thorne had never surrendered to anyone, not even fate. On the 4th day, Adrian arrived holding an envelope. He looked relieved and broken at once. You both need to hear this, he said, handing it to Evelyn. It was found in Damian's office, hidden behind the painting of the sea. Evelyn opened it. Inside were legal documents transferring ownership of the company to her name, with a simple note written in his hand. For the first time in my life, I'm giving something away, because I want to, not because I have to. Use it to build, not to hide. Her eyes filled with tears. He gave this to me without telling me. Adrian nodded. He knew they'd come for him, and he wanted you protected. He always did, even when he pretended not to. Hours later, she walked into Damian's hospital room. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of rain against the window. He was awake, eyes on the ceiling when she spoke. You gave me your company. He smiled weakly. Not my company, our legacy. I won't live long enough to rebuild it. You will. Don't say that, she whispered. You're going to walk again. He turned his head slowly, meeting her gaze. Maybe, but even if I don't, I'll still stand through you, Evelyn. You gave me back something I thought was gone. She took his hand, the strength in her voice, surprising even herself. Then we stand together always. Weeks passed. The world outside still spoke his name with scandal, but slowly the truth began to surface. The real cause of the accident was revealed, the board's corruption exposed. Public sympathy turned to admiration. Thorne. Industries rose again under Evelyn's command, while Damian quietly disappeared from headlines, choosing solitude over fame. Months later, spring came to the cliffs. The mansion had been repaired, its halls filled once more with light. Tea. Evelyn returned from the city one evening to find the west wing door open. The room inside had changed. The white sheet was gone. The portrait on the wall showed a new image, not Celeste, not loss, but hope. Damian had repainted it himself. It was her standing before the sea wind in her hair, light in her eyes. The title at the bottom read Redemption. She turned and found him at the doorway, his wheelchair beside him, but his hands gripping a pair of canes. His face was pale with effort, but his eyes burned with determination. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself forward, one small step, then another. Her breath caught Damian. He laughed softly. Don't look at me like I'm fragile. I'm just proving you wrong, one step at a time. She ran to him, catching him before he fell. He rested against her shoulder, their hearts beating in rhythm. You shouldn't be walking yet, she whispered. He smiled faintly, and missed the chance to walk to you. Never outside the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, bathing the mansion in gold. He looked at her eyes, bright with tears. Evelyn, you once asked what I see when I look at you. I see the reason I'm still breathing. I see my cure. She kissed him gently, the kind of kiss that heals rather than burns. In that moment, the house that had been filled with silence and grief finally felt alive again. Years later, people would tell stories about the reclusive billionaire who vanished from the spotlight and the woman who rebuilt his empire. But those who had once looked up at the cliffs swore that on clear evenings, they could still see two figures standing by the glass balcony, watching the sea together. The man who once believed he could not desire, and the woman who taught him that love was not weakness, but rebirth. And when the wind carried their laughter down the shore, it sounded like a promise whispered against the waves that some souls, no matter how broken, are meant to find each other again.